All right, let's dive into this. You've given us a really fascinating set of materials here, all about this TV series called Counterpart,
Hmm.
and it seems like we're really going deep into these stories about parallel realities and
Yeah.
like what it would mean to actually meet yourself, your other self.
Right.
They've got like episode lists and plot summaries and cast details and even like production information and some critical reception. It's a real treasure trove. This is.
It is, yeah. It really gets at this core human fascination, I think. This sort of like what if question taken to like the most extreme level.
Right.
Like what if there were literally another you out there? And that these sources kind of explore the implications of that, not just like personally, but also like the global consequences.
Yep. Yeah. And it really all hinges on this core idea in Counterpart, right?
Yeah.
This idea that there's this like seemingly normal UN agency. It's based in Berlin, the Office of Interchange, they call it, OI. But secretly they're guarding a doorway to another Earth that split off from ours back in 1987.
Yeah.
And for like 30 years, there's this guy, Howard Silk, who's been working there, just kind of like processing these messages that seem completely meaningless to him, totally oblivious to this huge secret
Yeah.
right in the middle of his workplace.
Yeah, it's really interesting that like the way they set it up, right? Like his life is so ordinary, and that contrast,
Yeah.
to this extraordinary thing that's been hidden all along. It really makes that reveal all the more powerful, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So your mission, if you choose to accept it, and you have,
Yeah.
is to really wrap your head around this world of Counterpart quickly, but thoroughly. We're going to pull out those big aha moments, those twists you don't see coming, and like the core conflicts
Yeah.
that are really tearing these two worlds apart, all without getting lost in every single detail.
Right.
So let's start at the very beginning. Where did these two separate Earths even come from?
Well, so the story goes that these two realities, they actually diverged way back in 1987, in the middle of the Cold War in East Germany. There was this experiment going on being run by this scientist named Yannick. And the really crucial moment was when Yannick from the Alpha world, and that's the world that's presented as being more like our reality, before the split. When Yannick from the Alpha world actually met his counterpart from this other world, this prime world, the parallel Earth.
So it was really like one encounter, like
Yeah.
two identical people meeting, and that's what kind of set this whole thing in motion, like a cosmic handshake that just went totally wrong.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, from that one interaction, these two Earths, which up to that point have been completely identical, started to diverge. Their histories and how things developed, they went in different directions. And what's really amazing is that this tiny little event, this localized event, had such massive repercussions over
No.
time,
Yeah.
like it just spread out and changed everything. It really shows you how like the tiniest change can create these whole new realities.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate butterfly effect,
Right.
like the biggest butterfly effect you could imagine.
Yeah.
So now one of the big things that really separates these two worlds is this devastating pandemic, right?
Yes. So in 1996, there was this huge divergence, right? When the prime world was hit by this catastrophic flu pandemic. And this wasn't just like a regular flu. This was something that wiped out hundreds of millions of people. Like the scale of it is just, it's hard to even fathom.
Hundreds of millions. Yeah, that's almost impossible to imagine. It really paints a picture of a totally different reality than
Yeah.
than what we know. So how did a disaster like that, how did that reshape the prime world?
Well, in a lot of ways, I mean, first of all, it really set them back technologically, because all their resources, their focus went into fighting this disease. It actually, ironically, also accelerated their advances in life sciences because they were so desperate to find cures and ways to prevent it. But maybe even more importantly, it created this deep suspicion in the prime world. Like they started to think that the alpha world was somehow responsible for the virus, like they had unleashed it on purpose.
So you've got like unimaginable tragedy leading to like interdimensional paranoia. That sounds like a recipe for some serious conflict.
Exactly. It basically fueled this kind of Cold War between Alpha and Prime.
Yeah.
Counterparts started acting as spies, infiltrating each other's worlds, trying to gather intelligence. So discord, and it brings up this really interesting question, right? Like, how do these huge cataclysmic events not only change societies internally, like their technology, their priorities, but how do they also change the relationship between these two mirrored worlds?
Yeah.
Like turning this potential for understanding and connection into this hostility and conflict.
Yeah. It really makes you think about how trauma,
Hmm.
like shared trauma, how it can either bring people together or just completely tear them apart. So speaking of individuals caught in the middle of all of this, let's talk about our main character, Howard Silk. He's not exactly Jason Bourne in the Alpha world, is he?
No,
Right.
no, that's a good point. Yeah. In the alpha world, Howard, when we first meet him, he's really quite a gentle, unassuming guy. He's worked at the OI for 30 years, just kind of diligently doing these low-level tasks. But he doesn't really understand the bigger picture or the true significance of what he's doing. His life seems pretty routine, maybe even a little bit unfulfilled, you might say.
But then of course we've got the twist.
Right.
We meet Howard Silk Prime.
Yeah, and he is completely different. I mean, he's a hardened intelligence operative. He's been shaped by this much harsher reality, this world that's been ravaged by the pandemic and this interdimensional Cold War. And the story really kicks off when Alpha Howard stumbles upon the truth. He discovers that this parallel world exists and that there's this other version of himself living this completely different life.
So what's really striking to you about this central duality,
Yeah.
having the same actor, J.K. Simmons, play these two very different versions of the same man?
Well, I think it's fascinating because it really explores this idea of potentiality, Like here are two individuals who started from the exact same point back in 1987, but their lives were just sculpted in completely different ways by their circumstances. Alpha Howard represents this life of quiet routine, maybe missed opportunities, while Prime Howard is all about resilience and this pragmatic ruthlessness, and their contrasting lives really make you think about how much our environment and the challenges we face, how much they shape us. It raises this question of like, is there some kind of unchangeable core to who we are, or are we really just products of our experiences? And Simmons' performance is just, it's amazing because he's able to show these subtle similarities, but also these really profound differences between the two of them.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just about the two Howards, right? We've got this whole web of characters who exist in both worlds.
Yeah.
Their lives are all connected and entangled in this interdimensional conflicts.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the other key players. Let's start with Howard's wife, Emily, or should I say the two Emilys?
Right, yeah. So in the Alpha world, we have Emily Burton Silk, who's Howard's wife. And she also works at the OI. She's part of this division called housekeeping, which is basically their internal counterintelligence unit. So they're responsible for identifying and neutralizing threats from the other side. Now, in the Prime world, Emily Burton is Prime Howard's ex-wife. And what's interesting is that she also works in OI housekeeping on her side, and she's romantically involved with this other operative, Ian Shaw.
So even their closest relationships have fractured and reformed in different ways. It's really fascinating. So what about Peter Quayle, who's the director of strategy in Alpha? He seems to be pretty important to the story as well.
Oh yeah, he's definitely a major player, and his life in Alpha gets very messy and dangerous because of his connection to the Prime world, specifically through his wife Claire, and this connection becomes this source of a lot of tension and mystery as
Yeah.
the story unfolds. It reveals all these layers of deception and hidden agendas. It's really quite gripping.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's Baldwin, or Nadia Fierro, I guess.
Yeah.
The materials describe her as someone you really don't want to mess with.
Yeah, she's a very skilled and kind of mysterious assassin who comes over from the Prime world into Alpha. And what's immediately really chilling is that her Alpha counterpart, Nadia Farrow, isn't a killer at all. She's actually this famous and incredibly talented concert violinist. So you've got this really stark contrast, right? Like one version of this person is actively hunting the other one, or people close to them. It's pretty disturbing when you think about it.
Yeah, that's about as different as you can get, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, Claire, who's Baldwin's handler, she seems to have some very strong personal motivations driving her actions.
Yeah, Claire's backstory is really interesting. It reveals this deep hatred that she has for the Alpha world, and it stems from this really traumatic experience she had growing up in the Prime world. She lost her parents in the pandemic in 1996. So this loss, this incredible tragedy, it fueled this hatred, this anger, and that was further cultivated by her upbringing in this this place called the school.
The school. What is that exactly? It sounds pretty ominous.
It is. The school was part of this program called the Indigo Program. It was this unauthorized, super secretive initiative run by Primari's strategy division. And these schools were basically designed to train kids from a very young age to be sleeper agents. And their mission was to infiltrate the alpha world and get revenge, for the pandemic, which they blamed on Alpha. And the funding for this program came from people within Prime OI who were convinced that Alpha was responsible for all their suffering. So Claire's entire life was shaped by this agenda, and it shows how these consequences of that initial divergence and then the pandemic, how they lingered for years and created this cycle of hatred and violence.
Yeah, it paints a picture of this really deep-rooted conflict, this conflict that's been going on for decades, fueled by loss and this desire for revenge. And this Indigo program, it sounds like a rogue operation, even within their own intelligence agency.
Yeah, completely. It was totally unsanctioned, very secretive. It shows that there was this group within Prime's intelligence that had this long-term plan for revenge, and they were willing to go to any lengths to carry it out.
So let's not forget about Yannick, the scientist who was there at the very beginning when these two worlds split apart. He shows up again later, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. Later on, we find out that Yannick is the warden of this underground facility in the Prime world called Echo. And because he was there right at the start in 1987 when the experiment happened, his perspective on the history of these two worlds and the danger they pose to each other, it becomes really important. He's like this living reminder of how fragile everything is and how easily it could all be destroyed.
Wow. So that gives us a really good overview of all the key players and this incredibly volatile situation that they're all navigating. So let's zoom in on season 1 now. What are some of the big turning points that happened in the first season?
Well, season 1 is where the audience and Alpha Howard, we all learn about this parallel world and his counterpart for the first time. And one of the big storylines is this mission to stop Baldwin, the assassin who's come to Alpha with this hit list. And tragically, Howard's wife, Emily, is on that list. So he's immediately thrown into this very personal, very dangerous situation.
Yeah, that's a pretty high stakes way to start things off.
Yeah.
It really brings the whole high concept stuff down to a very human level.
Exactly. And season 1 also shows us how Prime agents are infiltrating the Alpha world. Like, we see Claire's marriage to Quayle, which is totally a sham, a way to get close to him and gather information. And then we have the slow and really disturbing reveal of this Indigo program and the fact that these sleeper agents have been living in Alpha for years completely undetected. And the tension just keeps building throughout the season. It all culminates in this really horrific massacre at Alpha OI, and then the crossing is sealed, at least temporarily. It's a huge cliffhanger.
Yeah, sounds like they really shook things up at the end of season 1. So where do things go from there? What happens in season 2?
Well, season 2 deals with the fallout of the crossing being closed, right? So now the Alpha world has to grapple with this terrifying realization that there are probably still Prime agents out there living among them. So they launch this huge effort to try and identify these sleepers. It gets pretty paranoid pretty quickly. And we also meet this new character, Mira, who's the head of the Indigo School. And significantly, she's also Yannick's daughter. So she's got this personal connection to the whole history of this conflict. And she becomes this really powerful antagonist who's determined to make sure the crossing stays closed permanently.
So the stakes get even higher and the personal connections get even more tangled and dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. And season 2 really digs into this long-standing hatred between the two worlds that's really rooted in the trauma of the pandemic and how it was handled. And we see these big internal conflicts and alliances shifting as characters on both sides try to figure out what to do and what they believe in.
Right.
Like what's right, what's wrong. It all gets really blurry. And sometimes survival just means making these really tough choices.
Wow. It's all incredibly intricate and thought-provoking.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the show itself. Who created it and how did critics and audiences react to it?
Yeah, so Counterpart was created by Justin Marks, who's a really talented writer. And of course it stars J.K. Simmons, who gives these amazing dual performances as both Howards. And the production was really ambitious. They filmed in Los Angeles and of course in Berlin, which is, the heart of the story. They even used Studio Babelsberg in Potsdam, which is this really famous historic studio. So they really brought a sense of realism to the setting, like it felt like a real place.
So they really made the setting a character in itself, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And the critics, they were pretty impressed, right?
Yeah, overall the reception was really positive. People praised the show for its tense atmosphere, the complex and intelligent plot, and especially for J.K. Simmons' performance. He was just fantastic. And both seasons actually have a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty rare. You know, it shows how consistently good the show was. Although I have to say there was one critic who said that the second season got a little bit too convoluted, a little bit too hard to follow, which, you know, I can kind of see that. It's a very intricate story with a lot of moving parts, so it's not always easy to keep track of everything.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes these complex shows, they get a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
So did the show win any awards?
It did, yeah. In 2018, Counterpart won an Emmy for Outstanding Main Title Design. And that's a really cool award because it recognizes the artistry and the technical skill that went into creating the show's opening sequence, which is really visually striking, and it really sets the tone for the show.
That's a great accolade. But too bad it didn't run for longer though. It was canceled after only 2 seasons. Right?
Yeah, unfortunately. It ran for 2 seasons, 20 episodes total. It premiered on Starz in December 2017, and the last episode aired in February 2019. And the production company tried to find another network or streaming platform to pick it up, but they weren't successful. And later on, Starz said that part of the reason they canceled it was because they were trying to shift their programming to appeal more to women specifically. They felt like Counterpart was maybe more of a show that men would watch, you know?
So what does all of this mean for you now that you've really gone deep into this world of Counterpart?
Well, I think Counterpart is a really compelling exploration of some really fundamental things about what it means to be human, you know, like identity, the choices we make, and how even the smallest events can have these huge ripple effects that we can't even predict. And the conflict between Alpha and Prime, it's driven by this shared trauma of the pandemic, but it's also about this deep ideological divide between these two worlds, and that creates this really rich backdrop for all these stories, both the big political ones and the smaller, more personal ones.
And here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just about, wowing us with parallel universes, right?
No, definitely not. It's about making us think about who we are and who we might have been if things had gone differently in our lives, you know? Like the fact that these characters have counterparts, it forces them to look at the paths they've taken and paths they didn't take. And it makes us think about the same thing in our own lives, right? Like all the little decisions that have led us to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this deep dive has given you a really, really solid understanding of the world of Counterpart and in its story. And if you want to go even further, I definitely recommend checking out some of the critical analyses that have been written about the show, especially the ones that focus on identity and the way it uses the Cold War as this metaphor for the conflict between these two worlds. And it's also interesting to compare Counterpart's take on parallel universes to other stories, other science fiction stories that explore similar ideas.
Yeah, there's a lot out there.
And lastly, here's a question to really get you thinking, a question that builds on everything we've talked about today, but we haven't really touched on it directly. Imagine that you were to meet your counterpart from another reality. What would be the one difference between you two, in terms of your personality or your choices or your life experiences? That would really surprise you. And what might that difference tell you about the choices, big and small, that have shaped your own life, the life you've lived in this reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something to really ponder.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But thank you so much for taking us on this fascinating journey through the world of Counterpart. It's a show that really sticks with you.
Yeah, definitely does. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun talking about this.
And thanks to all of you out there for listening. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.